Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Agasicles Statements from Gearworks.com and the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, back with another episode of What's Your Issue, episode number 2. Hey, you guys! Steven, my partner in crime here as always. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good.
All right. We are getting off to a late start. Totally my fault. Slight adjustment in my time management scheme from this morning actually has replicated throughout my day and caused me to be behind, as I didn't have a lot of the stuff pre-staged that I normally would. But we are going to go ahead and talk comics once again every week. Steven and I get together. We talk about the books that were in last week's pull. We go through an on-air podcast review of 3 issues a piece for a total of 6 issues. Then we talk about TBTIRTW to Bitra, the best thing we read last week for each of us. Also, we call out any honorable mentions, which would be books that, on a review scale of 1 to 10, with half-point increments, would have scored an 8.0 or above in a review. And then we finally give you our pulls for the following week so that you know what's coming down the pike and what we'll be discussing on next week's podcast. If you didn't know, and if you didn't guess, you should have. It's a spoiler show. We're going to get into all the books and all the details. It's why we do it on Monday nights, because we figure everybody pulls their books on Wednesday. Hopefully you're done reading them by the weekend. You have a couple days of downtime. Now is a good time for us to talk the review section. But if you haven't, for some reason, read one of the books that we're going to be talking about, the books that we're going to be talking about are in the show notes on YouTube and on SoundCloud, and it should be replicated on Pocket Cast as well. So you should kind of know what's in the agenda. If you haven't finished reading those books and they're in your poll, go away, go finish the issue. It'll take you 15 to 30 minutes, and then come back and listen to our talking points. We're going to kick off this week's episode with me talking about Robotech number 13. Now, I reviewed Robotech on my website, gearworks.com, maybe 3-4 months ago, issue number 10, and came away not hugely impressed. It's written a little for a younger age group. It's written a little bit maybe for the manga crowd, but predominantly I didn't really particularly care for the art. It was a little overly cartoony, a little too Saturday morning-ish. But they were trying to match some kind of mature themes into it. It was just kind of janky from a feel standpoint. But there's a new artist on this month, I noticed, and maybe Henry Presettia had rolled on earlier. I'm not exactly sure because this is not one of my recurring pulls. But I really like his art. It's far more detailed. It looks like a slightly more mature comic. I don't, not really settled on that term, but he's doing a lot. A lot better. It's more to my liking than before. Story and plot wise, I still kind of have some issues with this comic. There were some weird, and maybe it may be cultural. It may be because it has its origin in Japanese culture, Eastern cultures. All right, hold on a second. I'm sorry. I gotta. Still trying to come back from a cold, but there are some weird things, like they're on a starship. They've been on it for a year. I don't understand why the female officers wear skirts on the bridge. It's just kind of janky and doesn't make sense. And it's not like in a Star Trek kind of way, like they're full length skirts, like from the waist down to like below their knees. Like it's Star Trek. They were one piece, both in the original series and in the Next Generation, and then in the Next Generation, like men wore some of the one piece skirts. So I just really, it's this weird kind of thing where it seems like it's trying to be progressive and forward thinking, but then it's still trapped in these antiquated male centric views. And there's still a couple points where the dialogue gets a little, like I said, like Saturday morning, not only Saturday morning cartoons, but very Eastern, like with Western voiceover dubs, cartoonish. But overall, I preferred this comic. The overall setup for this book was the SDF-1 is returning to Earth. It turns out that the captain's parents are principal decision makers on Earth. The father's an admiral, the mother's a senator. they are coming to the resolution that they need to send the SDF-1 away so that the Zentraedi do not attack the Earth a second time. And in the midst of this, the Zentraedi have actually followed the SDF-1 to Earth and launch a surprise attack. The Supreme Commander of the Zentraedi is actually trying to have killed, and I can't remember all the names of all the cast of characters, because like I said, this is not one of my recurring pulls, but it's trying to have killed one of her rivals in the command structure, but that individual has figured that she would make an assassination attempt during this attack, so he's prepared for it. Like I said, overall better than it was before. I scored this book overall, I think, a 7.5. I'm actually going to need to look that up. Maybe I didn't score it that high. I think it was a 7.0, actually. But like I said, overall, just way better than when I read it a few months ago. Steven, have you ever read any of the Robotech comics?
No.
Okay. So yeah, like I said, I scored it a 7.0 on a 10-point scale. So the next book that I want to talk about in review fashion is Immortal Hulk number 7 by Al Ewing with art by Joe Bennett. Now, this is a book that I've been on since its launch, 7 issues in. It is, if you're not familiar with what they're doing with the book, it is written a little bit more like a horror comic. It's definitely a case of the macabre. I kind of think a little Jekyll and Hyde. Joe Bennett's version of the Hulk, as he's penciling it, is a little more, like I said, Frankenstein-ish, kind of Jekyll and Hyde-ish, kind of a monster kind of face. I wound up scoring this book overall a 7.0 out of 10. I've been predominantly up in the series. It typically comes in for me at about a 7.5, just below great. I've stayed on it because it's just interesting what they're doing and what they're doing with the Hulk. In this issue, at the end of last issue, we had the Avengers show up, and it's a very popular mixture. You had Captain Marvel, Captain America, now that he's done with this whole Secret Empire thing. Thor, She-Hulk, and this version of the She-Hulk is being drawn and written as if Jen Walters has kind of lost control of the beast part of the Hulk, of the She-Hulk, She-Hulk persona. Apparently a thing that happened to her when Banner died. And there's some dialogue that goes back and forth in this issue when she's engaged with the Hulk that suggests that kind of part of your subconscious or a corner pocket of your psyche is what asserts itself and determines how and in what form the Hulk manifests itself. So Walter Langowski with Sasquatch was a thing that was heavily driven by his ego and his sense of insecurity. Bruce, I mean, the Hulk's representation is typically, manifests based on the caged rage and anger that really exists within Bruce that he kind of keeps under control and beneath the surface. With Jen, what Hulk suggests in this issue is that her representation has always been the idealistic representation of how she wants people to see her. And so that's why She-Hulk has typically kind of been drawn as an object of beauty. It's because Jen wants people to see her as a strong, muscular, powerful woman, but not as a monster, and that's why her persona represents as it does. She has lost control of that nuance in this, and looks very much more so like the monster beast kind of Hulk that Joe Bennett is drawing. My problem, my problem with this issue is I get that Ewing is trying to do something kind of a little retro, but not so retro that they would have brought in like Mike Allred to do his 1950s, 1960s style Silver Age of comics treatment. And hopefully we will get Steven back. He just dropped off. But the problem. So I get that he's trying to do this retro thing, and for the issues that he's done, that's been more like a horror comic. I've dug that. I've been into it. In this issue, I guess they kind of do something that's still retro, but feels very antiquated. The macabre kind of style comic has felt a little Victorian era, which has been enjoyable, particularly while I've been reading Newberry and Hobbs, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show. But in this issue, the setup and the reason it feels very, very comic booky and stands out and feels a little janky is you have 6 of the most powerful Avengers that have ever been a part of the team. And so Steven's had a computer crash. He's going to get back on as soon as he can. So I'm going to continue charging ahead with my books, and hopefully we'll get him back in here, and he will be able to riff on his. What they do is they each attack the Hulk in kind of this round robin carousel fashion, and I'm just like, if you have Thor and She-Hulk and Captain Marvel and Iron Man and the Hulkbuster, why would you all attack him one-on-one individually at a time? I get that you maybe want to maintain some reserve forces and you don't want to throw all your, poker chips down on the table all at once. But then maybe you have, Thor and She-Hulk attack him, and then you hold, Iron Man and Captain Marvel in reserve. For some reason, Captain Marvel is the one that's relegated to get all of the evacuees out of the area. And I'm like, why wouldn't you send Captain America to do that, as he'll be the least effective against the Hulk? Now, maybe you do that because, American opinion isn't so high on Captain America after the whole Secret Empire Hydra thing. Okay, maybe. But it's the Hulk, right? It's an extinction level event that's going on. So the way the issue is written, Thor mixes it up with the Hulk first, and I think then they have Cap step in, then it's Iron Man, and then it's She-Hulk, and maybe She-Hulk and Iron Man are swapped, but it just feels, man, it's like it's an old book, like straight out of the 70s, and I'm like, when you would have the characters attack one-on-one so that each one would kind of get a little page time, but tactically and plot-wise, it kind of doesn't make sense to me. So the issue fell a little flat for me. Joe Bennett's pencils are on point. I can't say anything about the art. There's a great scene where Tony has made the decision to call down this super powerful arc laser or whatever to destroy the Hulk. And everybody's wondering whether or not they did the right thing. And there's a scene between a child who's an evacuee and Carol. And as Carol's contemplating, whether or not they've done the right thing or not, because normally you would think Carol would have been all for like calling down the arc laser to destroy the Hulk. But I think she has a couple lines in there that mention that she, in the wake of Civil War II, is definitely trying to take maybe a different approach. It kind of seemed curious to me that it appears that she's still chairman of the Avengers after all the sturm and drang that's gone on with her. But there's a scene where the child asks her, when they'll be able to go back home, and surely, everything back home will be okay, and hands her a little action figure of herself. And you can kind of clearly see in her face the realization of the choices that they have made. So it's a very interesting issue. Like I said, I almost wanted to, to grade this book a skosh bit higher because of the ending. And the ending, like, for all I say about whatever went on earlier in the book, the ending is awesome because what they have is you see the Hulk's body sitting there burned, but we know that the whole deal is that basically he comes back at night in kind of this Halloweenish, werewolf kind of Jekyll and Hyde portrayal that they're giving him. The camera cuts away. You cut to a guy walking through the shadow base or whatever the army is doing about the Get the Hulk project, essentially. And there's a guy there doing the evil genius monologue. And then the camera, and he's talking about how, but we're going to make sure you don't come back. And then we're going to capture all your secrets so we can, build an army or use you for mass destruction. And then the camera cuts to a laboratory table, and they have taken the Hulk and sliced him up into pieces and put him in jars like something straight out of like a serial killer horror flick. it's an absolutely awesome ending. It absolutely sticks the landing. Almost enough to make me forgive the transgressions of the earlier pages, but those earlier pages, took up a large chunk of the book. So again, at the end, I wound up giving it a 7.0 out of 10, and didn't score it that high. Again, tying up with Robotech. The last book of mine that's in the reviews section, which I'm going to go ahead and do because Steven is not back yet, was Miss Marvel number 35. Miss Marvel is a wonderful character. I definitely applaud her entrance into the Marvel universe. I love her in Champions. The only thing I kind of said about this issue was I was just glad this arc was over. I've been on record as saying I'm not really super crazy about having read through the thing with her and the Shocker, or her and Bruno. Like I said, I for whatever reason, I tend to like the book more when it's her with her female friends kind of going through the teen friendship thing of growth rather than the girl-boy thing. So in this issue, they basically resolve the Shocker thing. There's a lot of portaling in and out of different time slices and dimensions. They meet the blue girl in the in-between space as they did last issue or the issue before. But this time, Kamala grabs the Shocker and shoves him into one of the portals and brings him with her, and then tries to shake him free in this portal dimension so that he will be trapped. Bruno, in the meantime, is trying to get the portals to close, figures it out in a stroke of engineering genius, and then Kamala is able to escape the clutches, literally clutches of the Shocker, and get out of the in-between space before Bruno closes the portal. Now, part of the reason I also didn't really like this issue is it kind of becomes a throwaway arc in general because the Shocker still makes it out. So if there had been more of a consequence and the Shocker had kind of been trapped forever in this in-between space, or maybe would have been taken off the chessboard for years, and then maybe allowed him to emerge more powerful than he's been, because I feel like he's kind of a sucker kind of level villain, then there would have been more consequences and it would have been more impactful. But he just drops out of like a latent closing portal at the end and arrives in Brooklyn, dropping in front of Miles Morales, who kind of just stares at him from the side of a building with a set of headphones on while he's like eating a snack. Now, granted, I guess Miles couldn't apprehend him since he wasn't in the actual act of committing a crime, but still, it's a little kind of Miles just sees the Shocker appear and doesn't like even bother to investigate or see if he's up to no good. So the whole thing is a little bit weird. Excuse me. Hopefully I will be over this cold pretty soon. So at any rate, I scored the issue a 6.5 out of 10. I continue to appreciate what Nico Leone and I can't remember who's on colors. Arf Leone does his own colors on this book. I continue to kind of like what they're doing color-wise, but again, Leone's style is a bit cartoony for me, and I go back and forth between whether I really like his particular style. Ian Herring is the color artist, or if it's a little off-putting for me. G. Willow Wilson, the writing style is fine. But again, plot-wise and the overall script, I just wasn't particularly interested in this arc, and I'm glad that hopefully we're moving on to something else. Next segment, I'm going to go ahead and go through. I'm going to keep pounding ahead because I'm not sure if Steven's going to make it back before I have to wrap up. The best thing I read this week actually turned out to be Newbury and Hobbs, The Undying Number 2 by George Mann and with art by Dan Boltwood. This is another comic that I read the first one of and wasn't really particularly happy with. It was not Victorian enough. While I guess I would concurrently say it a little too much mimicked Sherlock Holmes and maybe some of the other Victorian era detective stories that we've all grown accustomed to, but didn't really set itself apart. In this issue, I started feeling a little more separation. There was a little more assertion of Veronica Hobbs, the female protagonist and partner of, I think his name is Nathan Newberry. she feels a little more powerful in this episode and a little more equal. The narration is still by her, but I just felt like the voice was stronger. The art style, I think, and overall art quality, I think, was also higher and stronger, to the point where I actually didn't mind the cartooniness that I veered away from in the first issue was utilized here in a way that I felt was more appropriate. Pretty decent creature work. Again, nothing as complicated as you would see in BPRD or a Hellboy comic or a Cullen Bunn, a Harrow County issue, but still, appropriate to the Victorianism that's represented in the comic. Not too much, a bit of the macabre, but not way over the top in like graphic realism. In this issue, they are investigating it again. We're a little rushed and not as prepared this week, but Newberry and Hobbs's previous enemy, who is apparently still alive and has been continuing to experiment on humans, which was apparently his shtick before, has experimented on and wound up yielding what has become an entire race of sewer-dwelling humanoids who are capable of communicating via some level of broken English, but have actually grown up to be a whole society. So there are men, women, and children. They capture Newbury Hobbs and two of their allies from Scotland Yard, take them down into the sewers and imprison them in a very kind of low-rent cage that they are able to escape from. And as they're making their escape, quietly, they are discovered by some children. A fight breaks out. Newberry actually throws one of the children off his back. The child ends up in the water. Can't swim. And I would hope that if you're like a creature feature and you live in the sewer, that your children would learn how to swim. But this kid didn't. So Newberry jumps in and saves him. And the sewer men and sewer women are grudgingly appreciative of his act sufficiently to allow the four protagonists to depart. When they depart, they make their way back to Scotland Yard, where some previous villains that they had captured, henchmen that they had captured, actually had bombs planted inside them and detonated them at the end of last issue. One of the lead inspectors who was with Newbury and Hobbs arrives back and sees the level of destruction. By the same token, they are starting now to get this notification that other people have been dropped off. We see one panel with the villain pictured, who informs one of his lieutenants to release the carriers. So I can only think that these are humans who have been infected with something. But those people are now being dropped off throughout the city. They have their chests have apparently been opened and sewed back together. So it's definitely something that gives you a bit of the Wiggins. Again, I appreciated that in the art style. And just the book was significantly better than the first issue was overall. I wound up scoring the book a 7.5 on a 10-point scale. So overall, for my polls this week, it was a pretty soft week. It wasn't. Hey, Steven.
Steven, got through. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem at all. So not a particularly strong week. I actually had no honorable mentions because I didn't have any books that scored 8.0 or above. It topped out with Newbury and Hobbs, The Undying, number 2 at 7.5. The only other thing that I'll mention then, without having any honorable mentions, is so there were no 8.0s, but Newbury and Hobbs, The Undying, number 2, which is by Titan Comics, I believe, by the way. I should have mentioned that for the publisher. But neck and neck with that was Red Hood Outlaw number 27. And in that issue, you have some great scenes between Jason and Bruce, with Bruce telling Jason that Roy Harper has died, which occurred in the pages of Heroes in Crisis number 1. It was a bit of a setup for me because I hit the page and I realized that Bruce was about to give him some tragic news, and I kind of took a pause because I was like, this is going to be a big deal, and I just kind of waited before I turned the page. I actually thought he was about to tell him about Dick, who we know has been shot in the head, and is now has some degree of brain and neural damage and memory loss. So he tells him about Roy, which I appreciated, but then they just walk away, and I'm like, wait, but Jason doesn't know about Dick Grayson either. So I thought that was a little bit interesting. And again, it was a good issue. I kind of like what they're doing with Red Hood Outlaw now. So very interesting dialogue between Jason and Bruce, with Bruce telling Jason, you're never coming back to Gotham, not even Arkham. But also says at the end, he doesn't, but he doesn't. Jason thinks that Bruce hates him and is disappointed in him so much. But Bruce tells him, I've never hated you, right? Sometimes you're a dumbass and sometimes I have to straighten you out, but like, I've never hated you. So it was some great scenes. I was very tempted to pick that as my best thing that I'd read this week. I admit that I worried a little bit that I was picking it, that if I had picked it as the best thing I'd read this week, it might have been because I was more strongly biased to select something that was on my personal recurring pull list because I get into the continuity so much. So admittedly, I maybe sheared away from that deliberately to reach out and tap Newbury and Hobbs number 2, the Undying number 2. But at the end of the day, I still felt like it was appropriate for me to make that selection. So, Steven, I'm going to let you go ahead and run through your reviews and your best thing that I read this week, and then we will catch back up when you hit honorable mentions, and then we can talk through what our pulls are for next week.
All right. My first review I'm going to give is Titans number 27. It's by Dan Ambinett and Brent Pepys. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. This issue was about the Titans. They going through a whole bunch of mourning and grieving because they have Roy Harper, who just got killed off in Hero Crisis. They only showed out in the beginning with Donna Troy putting the flower on Roy Harper's grave, and then it cuts to the Titans talking about what happened to Nightwing when he got shot in the head, and he's in the hospital recovering, and the Titans grieve about that. And there's also a character that they saved a couple of issues before, because their mission is to save all the characters that have been turned to metahumans since the Dark Knight's Battle event has happened. And there's something the atmosphere that's affecting some humans turning to metas, and one got into a coma, so they've been monitoring him, and he suddenly passes away in the issue. They try to do everything they can to save him, and then he ends up passing away. So they're dealing with 3 things affecting him in all sorts of ways, and that's one of the reasons why I really did like this issue, because they actually did grieve, and they had a lot in their mind, and they try to do the best they can, all the Titans, and each character had their moments of grief, and I like how they did that all in one issue. And I was pretty surprised because I haven't been really liking Titans that much, but this one was a really strong one.
So was this just a Talking Heads issue, and it was just them dealing with Roy? Because Roy hasn't been operating as a member of the Titans, has he?
No, he hasn't. He left the Titans during it was before Dark Knight's Metal. It was like he left during some time around there. And then they just started talking about him now. That's about it.
Okay, cool. So I mean, a mid arc swing is nothing to squeeze at. Interesting. So Abnett is on Titans, Aquaman, and I think he's doing. I can't remember if he's doing one of the Justice League Metal offshoot books. What was that? Is he doing Justice League Odyssey?
I think he is.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. He writes a lot of titles. I noticed. I think there's more he writes.
Good. It's very cool and it's interesting, but also very well deserved and very cool to see him back doing a number of I hate to say mainstream books, but after so long where he was kind of only out on the fringes doing his creator owned work, it's nice to see him having like steady mainstream center of continuity kind of content, because I think he's a different kind of writer, and I think he's needed in mainstream comics. So it's
Yeah,
I love
he's
having
good.
him.
I think he's one of the greatest writers I've seen in comic book history. So yeah, I give this issue an 8 because it really did deal with every character's emotions, going through different types of grief, and that was pretty interesting. And so yeah, I'm gonna go to the next issue. Is Ben Reilly's Scarlet Spider number 25. This is the final issue of the series, and this is by Peter David, and the art was Bruno Avalarea. And I really did. I thought this issue was okay. It did end the chapter pretty well, but it was looked like it kind of rushed. So I would think I'll give it like a 6 or 6.5 out of 10. And it's just it was like the weakest issue I think Peter Dave has written in this book. And the art wasn't so great. It was also rushed. It was like stick figure kind of art. So I just wanted to talk about this series because I have been liking it consistently, and I've noticed it was falling apart in the ending issues of the series, and I found that got canceled. So
Now, is Peter David a writer that you normally stick with?
yes, I did. He is. He's
Okay.
one of my favorites too. I really enjoy his writing from since X Factor.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah, and I liked his Spider-Man 2099 series
Okay.
as well.
Yeah. Very cool.
So yeah, I've been liking this series a lot because of the this Scarlet Spider. I mean, this Ben Reilly was a clone of Ben Reilly. He was a clone of a clone, and he had a different personality. And in Clone Conspiracy, he had like a very selfish personality. At the same time, he did kind of like he was sort of demented. I can say like he had a personality of caring at the same time being very selfish, and I could normally see him as a villain. And I thought it was a cool concept to have him as a new Jackal, and that's what he was doing in Clone Conspiracy. But then out of nowhere, for some reason, they decided to make him have his own series. And instead of him staying as a Jackal, he tried to redeem himself as becoming a hero. And throughout the series, you can see that it doesn't work out for him. And I liked how this series did end in a way that he realizes that he can't be a hero. It's not really who he was meant to be, and decides to be a villain again. So I'm glad they took that path because him being a hero wasn't interesting for me.
Well, man, so talk to me about what's going on in X-Men Black. As have they reset the new status quo yet for the X-Men, or are they still kind of dealing with wrangling the previous versions of Cyclops, Phoenix, and Iceman and Beast from the past out of the picture?
Well, this X-Men Black is a whole bunch of one shots. It's a whole one shot with a whole bunch of villains. And I guess I don't know, for some reason Magneto was not a villain in the book. And I mean, he's been a hero for quite a while. I know X-Men Blue was turning him into a villain again, but that book just turned him to a hero again. The Black Magneto one, and now he's doing Mojo, and I really did. It's by Scott Ackerman and Nick Bradshaw. There's two writers, and the artist was Andre Lima Arujo, and I really thought this issue was pretty interesting because it did humanize Mojo. In the issue, he wants to destroy the new X-Men because he hates the new X-Men characters, like the young mutant characters, and he wants to destroy them with his own version of the original X-Men. It was kind of weird because he ends up using the Sentinel instead of original X-Men, but you do see him going to a Starbucks and he wants to get a coffee, and he tries to hit on this girl, and he noticed that the girl gives him like a really bad attitude, and for some reason that made her and fall in love with her even more. So she walks off, and Glob actually is there at the same time, and he tries to talk to Mojo and like show him how he can uh he gives him a few points to be his wingman on the girl, and he kind of humanizes him a bit, and uh at one of Mojo's assistants uses the Sentinel to attack the young X-Men, and the girl was accidentally ran into where the Sentinels and young X-Men were, and Mojo decides to just knock everything down, like hit the Sentinel and try to save the girl, and decides to take her away and hopefully date next time in the future or something like that. So it kind of ends off that way. So I thought it was pretty interesting. I'll give it a 8 because I really did like how they humanized Mojo in a weird way, and it was pretty funny. It has some comedy elements in there, and it was pretty entertaining. So that's pretty much it for the reviews.
Cool, man. And you have a very interesting pick for the best thing you read last week. I'm assuming this is a one shot. So what is going on with the What If series? Have they brought this back, or
Yeah, they
I
have
don't
brought
get it.
them back. They're gonna have a whole bunch of what ifs. It's like, I don't know. It's like over uh it's over 5. Like, I don't know. It's like 10 what ifs. I didn't keep count on how many, but I know they're gonna release a lot. And I've been picking them up. I didn't like the last 2 what ifs that they came out last week. They were a bit okay, but this one was really pretty interesting. I really liked the concept. Is the what if Peter Parker was the Punisher #1 by Carl Potts and Juanan Ramirez. And I really thought this was the best issue of the week because it gave Peter Parker a different dynamic or perspective of him having, like, his origin story is a bit different. Instead of not killing the the burglar that killed Uncle Ben, he ends up killing him in this universe. Like, he actually takes on the path of revenge. But this Peter Parker is still somewhat redeemable because he gives the villains second chances, and if they don't make up their second chance, he will kill them off. So he was a bit redeemable, and he there was another interesting thing. It was that he was using his intelligence, like his science, to defeat villains with different bullets. With every time you fought a villain, he had used different bullets with different weaknesses.
Okay, so a little, almost a little kind of Green Arrow or Hawkeye ish.
Yeah, and another thing was that during the issue, there was like he accidentally let left Green Goblin alive because when he found out who he was, he noticed that Norman Osborn went to amnesia and forgot who he was.
Right.
But Norman Osborn went through amnesia, but the Green Goblin persona didn't. So the Green Goblin persona took over and decided to do revenge on Parker by trying to almost killing Gwen Stacy. And after Peter Parker saved Gwen Stacy and ended up killing Green Goblin, he decided to quit as Peter Parker because he said that giving villains second chances is what ruined his love being. He's ruined the life of his loved ones getting hurt. So he decided to retire as a Punisher, and in the end, the origin story of the Punisher happens. So, and he was supposed to stop that crime from happening, the Punisher family getting killed by the mafia. He was supposed to stop that, but he decided not to, and it causes Frank Castle to become the Punisher, like take his mantle.
So
and that's how it ends.
So we're getting a ton of Punisher and a ton of Spider-Man in Marvel comics right now. I would say more than the normal density that we're accustomed to. Is that a good thing? So we've got the Cosmic Punisher going on over in, I forget what book. That's maybe its own book.
It's a mini series, yeah.
Okay. So you've got that. They're showing up in What If. You've got the Punisher series reboot, which is remarkably good. I think I've added it to my recurring pull after kind of dropping it off, just because I didn't think that there was any way that that it would be that good again after they ended the previous series. Do you think we're getting a little Spider-Man and Punisher oversaturation right now, or are you okay with it?
I'm okay with it. I'm not sure it's oversaturation, but I'm okay with it so far.
But, okay, cool, man. So talk us through your honorable mentions. As I mentioned, I didn't have any. So
all right. So my honorable mentions was Catwoman number 4, Wonder Woman number 56, Kick-Ass number 8, Ninja K number 12, and Red Hood the Outlaw number 27.
So any of those books particularly stand out in any way that's worth mentioning and going through at all?
I really did like Wonder Woman number 56 because it's dealing with the Witching Hour crossover event, and it's a lot of new magic mythology, and I like how Wonder Woman is incorporated it. And I noticed that James Tallian really humanizes a lot of characters like you wouldn't think of, like Man Bat, and he actually humanized Cersei in a way I didn't think he could, but yeah, she did it. And I thought that was interesting.
All right, very cool. Let's go ahead and wrap up the show, and let's carry everybody out by informing them of what we will be pulling next week and what we will be reviewing on next week's show. So I'm going to be pulling Batman number 57, Justice League number 10, Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 311. This is a new creative team walking on after the departure of Chip Zdarsky. I'll be reading the final issue of Millennium, The Girl Who Danced with Death number 3, and then also concurrently seeking a new ongoing series to put on my pull list in its place. And then I'm going to read Maul number 2 over by Scout Comics. So this will be the first time that I've read this issue, and actually the first time that I've checked out this publisher. I've got to kind of dig up some information on them because I'm not familiar with Scout Comics, but they apparently have a decent stable of ongoings going on right now. So I will be finding out that information as well as reading that comic. For reviews next week out of those pulls, I'll be talking about Maul number 2, Spectacular Spider-Man number 311, and Millennium, The Girl Who Danced with Death number 3 on next week's show. So, Steven, what are you going to be pulling? And if you have you identified which of those you're going to be talking about in the review segment of next week's show?
I'm going to be pulling Aquaman number 41, Justice League number 10, Justice League Dark number 4, Life of Captain Marvel number 4, Lucifer number 1, Mr. and Mrs. X number 4, Nightwing number 51, Old Man Logan number 49, and Pearl number 3. I haven't decided what to review yet. But Yeah, so I'm gonna be picking up.
Cool. So I think just to have some additional content for us to kick around next week, I will also pull Aquaman number 41. Check out another bit of content by Mr. Dan Abnett, who we talked about this week.
Yeah.
And I think...
Yeah, because I noticed it's a crossover with Aquaman and Justice League. Yeah.
And I am also going to pull your Nightwing number 51, as I have been reading Batman. That is one of my recurring pulls. But I have not been reading Nightwing, and I know I heard there were some interesting things going on there. So I will give that a read as well, since currently right now my weekly pulls are pretty light with just 5 issues apiece. So I'll add a couple in there for us to kick around next week. So anything else that you want to talk about tonight for this episode of What's Your Issue?
No, not really.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for anybody who happened to swing by and join in on the live show, and anybody who wanders by to check out the archive version of this on YouTube. I do want to say to the audio listeners out there, I've been looking at the metrics of the episode on SoundCloud and Pocket Cast. Thank you so much for so many people who are swinging by to check out the show. It is highly appreciated. If you have any input for us, if you want to join the conversation, probably the best place to do that is you can always leave a comment underneath the episode on the YouTube channel, E2KG Network, but also feel free to follow us on Twitter, or even if you don't want to follow us, if you don't want to actually add us to your list, just shout out to us in a mention on Twitter. It's at E2KG Network on Twitter. If you have any feedback on any of the issues that we discussed or any of the topics that we go over and you want to participate in the conversation. So on behalf of Gearworks.com, the E2KG Network podcasting channel, the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, Steve and Laura, and all the other co-hosts of the E2KG Network, my name has been Agasicles. This has been What's Your Issue, episode number 2, discussing the comics that shipped the previous week of Wednesday, 10 October. That's going to close it out for us this week. Join us for next week's discussion of the comics that we mentioned in the rundown of what we'll be pulling. Thanks so much for joining the People's Weekly Comic Book Reviews podcast. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.